All right, thank you all for joining. I see a lot of brave souls in the room today. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for the ERA for inviting me. As mentioned by Sanya, we're going to talk about the role of lawyers. And just a little bit about myself. I'm Raymond Blijd. I'm CEO of legalcomplex.com, and I'm co-founder of legalpioneer.org. Way back when, I started my law education, and I specialized in intellectual property law and legal knowledge system engineering. And I actually started my career programming legal rules into software. So that's how I got my first job. And that's also where I saw the first issues with encoding legal rules into machines. One of the main, should I say, obstacles that we encountered were that some rules were conflicting with other rules. But the main objective back then, the main challenge was, how do you envision all of the real life situations and have all of those circumstances covered in your system? That has now all changed. So I'll take you in a brief history tour. I'll keep it practical and light. So here goes. For this conversation, I just wanted to frame AI as a general concept. So AI basically is just mathematics on top of numbers, and beneath that is data. So what people perceive to be artificial intelligence are just calculations on the numbers, and those numbers are derived from data. Put into in other words, this is just terminology: machine learning, algorithms, information, and data. But you notice one constant, and that is data. So that influences how artificial intelligence actually behaves. Now, let's go back a little bit in history, 700 years ago. When I came in, I just noticed one of the first speakers talking about legal design. Well, legal design was employed by this lawyer 700 years ago, Bartolo de Sassoforato, 1353. And he wanted to solve real estate issues. And he was using legal design, and he was using math. So AI already existed a really long time ago, but we didn't call it AI back then. But basically, what this example taught me was lawyers need support from technology, or better said, lawyers want to strive for more precision in handling the law. So that's why they're using math. So, what I just said, using AI to find law. But the real question is, present day, what is happening? Well, I was reluctant to mention this, and it was also already mentioned in one of the previous talks. This is back from my own country. It's called black box adversarial fraud. When I showed this to my kids, she said, "Why do you call it black box? Why don't we call it white box?" I said, "Well, that's a bias." I said, "But black boxes in airplanes are a good thing." So in this case, as also mentioned before, this was the first time, as reported, I'm not sure, where a algorithmic or AI system was deemed to be violating human rights. What is also happening right now in general is that everybody is looking at, we need to regulate more AI. Even the Pope calls for having more regulation. So what is happening after that? This is a story that I read this morning, and that is regulation in New York. I haven't read the whole story, just entered it into this presentation right here. But basically what they want to do is they want to unbiased systems in hiring. And they want to make it illegal for systems to filter out certain candidates and have a more diverse pool of employees. This is just, this was published yesterday and I read it this morning. So, what is the natural reaction that lawyers or legal professionals, they usually aim to, put a ban or put a stop or want to regulate things and keep it as is. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with this case in France about banning analytics on case law in the French state. I won't go into much detail, but I just want to keep things as a broader mindset of looking at what our natural reaction will be when we encounter these conflicts and these issues with artificial intelligence. So that's why I also made a distinction in the beginning with you have AI, but it's basically mathematical on information, on data. So I want everybody just take a step back, take a deep breath, and let's think about this from another angle. Why does law struggle with AI? Well, there is one reason, actually two. The first question we need to ask is, how do we create AI? And if you look at, we have registered over 2,000 companies that claim to be using AI in the legal and regulatory space. These are companies registered as of 2010, so they didn't exist before. And these are the private companies, so these don't include Google, Facebook, and all the publicly listed companies. This is the total amount of money invested in those companies by venture capitalists in both sectors, legal and regulatory technology. So I'll explain regulatory technology in a few more slides. But this is the important point that I wanted to make. In the legal sector, only 2-somewhat billion is invested. The rest is invested in regulatory technology. So the logical question is, what is that? Well, let's first take one step back. Let's see where the money is invested in the legal space. So you see here, most of the money is in contract analytics. So looking at contracts and trying to figure out what the clauses and the rules are. The rest is in e-discovery. E-discovery is very popular in the US for litigation purposes. But the important thing I wanted to point out here in this whole graph is that 87 million is used by law enforcement. One of those companies created that black box in the Netherlands. So that's the amount of money in entirety that is being used to predict law by the government. So what is RegTech? These are on a high level where the money is allocated in regulatory technology. The first one that you see on top is image recognition. That is facial recognition, or mostly facial recognition, and that is being used for security purposes. A lot of money is also invested in security companies that are trying to thwart off hackers with artificial intelligence. But a lot of money is allocated at data and text analytics. And you've listened to Facebook and Google. They are investing in these kinds of technologies as well. So we haven't included those numbers, but these are just the private companies that are trying to figure out what to do with data and how to influence. And the influence part is also important, and we'll see that in a couple of slides. Now, the second reason. How do we create laws? Before, we had this human ecosystem of how we looked at the law. everybody here has an opinion. That opinion is then adopted by politicians. It is then turned into legislation. The legislation becomes law. We create rules. Judges interpret those rules, and those get interpreted back to us, and then we form our opinion again. However, that dynamic has changed. What we now have is that our opinion is formed by the public, by networks, and that those networks are fed by companies, and that's where you see a lot of the investment in technology is going. So as a matter of fact, from a really high level, you might even say that AI is creating laws at the moment by influencing our opinion. So before we ask how to find law, maybe we should ask how to fix law. Now, there are a lot of debates going on that I've heard in the previous presentations, but I'm trying to give a fresh perspective on what may possibly help us to fix the data that goes into our AI. The goal might be, how do we create unbiased AI? One technology that is currently being used in those data analytics companies and those text analytics companies is called, oh, I skipped a slide. Apologies. The first question that we should ask ourselves is, how do we make the data diverse so that it doesn't influence the AI system that much to give a bias prediction or a bias verdict? There is one technology being currently used that might help us alleviate that problem. And that technology is called, or that principle is called, synthetic data generation. Anybody familiar with synthetic data generation? It's a concept that is being used by practically they're taking actual data and then they're duplicating it and making it anonymous. So the whole goal behind it initially was to create anonymous data by using actual data and then randomizing it. But what they're now using it for is to also influence the AI to predict in a certain fashion. Now these developments we can also use in the law to create the data that might help us to create unbiased AI. So the first question is, how do we create data diversity? Well, one way is to create fake data that will influence the AI. The second one is, how do we make the algorithms or the machine learning more fair? There's another technique called generative adversarial networks. I had to read it, sorry. Anybody familiar with adversarial networks? It's a technique whereby they pit one AI system against another AI system and let them fight it out to find out which AI system is better. What happens is that those two systems also generate data. What the technique also helps you do is, it helps you validate the other AI system. So it helps you look at which system may be better suited for a certain purpose. These techniques are being used now in the gaming industry, they're being used in the automotive industry, and they're also being used in the biomedical industry. So what I try and propose here in general is that our role should be to find the bugs in the system and don't ban the technology in general. Now there's one more question that I wanted to try and answer. In the future, the question that I'm looking to answer as well is, should humans assist in automatic decision making? A raise of hands. Anybody wants a human in the loop at any point in time in a legal decision making process? You see, I can see those on the live stream, but I sense that it's not 50, it's less than 50. Oh, well, it's 50-50 in the room. Well, we are now part of a really big social experiment whereby we have a human-assisted way of deciding, and there's a fully technological way of deciding without human assistance. And I got reminded earlier in one of the talks that actually I paid about €200 last year to a robo-judge. And I got reminded by the presentation from Estonia. In the Netherlands currently, we generate about 1 billion annually just based on speeding tickets, parking tickets, and traffic tickets. And that is all a fully automatic system. And that cost me €200 last year. But there's another system that may be more familiar, whereby we can fully judge from close by a automated system versus a human-assisted automated system. And this is not in your slide deck because after I sent in my presentation, I woke up the next morning and it hit me like this is a really good example where we can see this live at work, actually every weekend. Goal line technology versus VAR. Anybody watching soccer? Well, every weekend you'll see all the headlines about how VAR makes mistakes. Since the adoption of the goal line technology, I think it was about 2014, we never saw a headline or a discussion that there was a debate about it. The only thing that was said before the implementation of goal line technology was that we might miss the debating about humans making errors. People thought that was the charm of watching soccer matches, is debating the decisions from the referee. And they were thinking, if we do goal line technology, we won't have this debate, there won't be any human intervention, it won't be as wonderful to watch. Well, now we have VAR, and not a lot of people are happy, especially Mourinho. So perhaps we should think about scaling back, looking at this technology as a way to assist us and not a way to ban or to prevent it from helping us. This is my last statement. Thought I'd keep it short. What I wanted to communicate is that what I sense, we are really scared to adopt technology to help us because we are, how should I say this delicately, unaware of the effects of what might happen to us as a species or in our humanity. So people might wonder, maybe this is a naive way of looking at technology. And my answer to that would be, why are we so scared? What is the danger of having AI support us fully without any debate? And one of the arguments that we're getting is, it is dangerous, it might, terminate us like in the movies or enslave us in some sense. Well, I'm living proof that I think it might not be as bad as we think it is if you look at goal line technology and if you look at VAR. So maybe we should strive as lawyers to look at it as a way to support us and not as a way to that it will replace us. That was my last slide. Any questions?